They laughed in her face. They called her names. One officer even hit her. Well, they didn't know. She was their new boss, and she had come to burn the old system down. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Chief Naomi Keller. Monday morning in Eastwood arrived shrouded in a light mist. The city was just beginning to stir after a night of rain, the streets still damp, reflecting the glow of street lamps that hadn't yet shut off completely. Naomi Keller stopped in front of the Eastwood Police Department headquarters, a weathered brick building whose facade bore the stains of time. She wore a simple gray blazer over a black blouse, dark jeans, and low-heeled boots. No badge, no nameplate, nothing to indicate she had just been appointed as the city's new chief of police, and the first black person to ever hold a position in the department's 122-year history. She stared at the revolving glass door in front of her and took a deep breath. I'm not here to impress, she thought. I'm here to observe. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and the stale sweat of unworn, unwashed uniforms. 3 officers stood chatting near the front desk, loud, crass, their eyes flicking past her, as if she were invisible. In the corner of the room, a middle-aged black man sat clutching a worn folder in his lap, his face weary. No one acknowledged him. Naomi approached the front desk. The young man behind it was glued to his phone, not bothering to look up. It wasn't until she cleared her throat that he glanced at her, disinterestedly scanning her neat curls, brown skin, and scuffed boots. What do you need? He asked flatly. Personnel? Naomi said, her gaze steady. Reason? Assignment processing. Her tone remained even. He looked at her like she'd just said something ridiculous, shrugged, and returned his phone without another word. Naomi didn't respond. She simply stood there, committing his face and his tone to memory. A burst of laughter came from the left. A tall, white officer with buzzed blonde hair was in the middle of telling a story about some black guy who thought he was a lawyer. The others laughed along. Naomi felt a tight chill form in her gut, but she held her ground, chin lifted. This isn't new, she reminded herself. But now I have the authority to change it. The back door suddenly swung open. A man stepped out, mid-40s, muscular, dressed in full uniform. A silver badge gleamed on his chest. Lieutenant Darren Holt. He spotted Naomi, stopped, and crossed his arms. No greeting. No warmth. What are you doing here? He asked, voice dry. Naomi raised her head. I'm here to complete some paperwork. What paperwork? His eyes narrowed. Personnel related, she replied, expression unmoved. Holt glanced over at the young man at the front desk. What's with her? He asked. Wants to see HR. The receptionist replied with a shrug. Holt smirked. Thought she was here for welfare assistance. Naomi didn't flinch. Her silence seemed to unsettle Holt. He stepped closer, leaning in slightly. This is a police station, not a community help center. She didn't move. That was the moment Naomi realized. Every eye in the room was on her. A black woman with no visible authority, no rank displayed. And because of that, they had dropped their guard completely, revealing exactly what they thought. She smiled faintly, not because she was pleased, but because now she could see clearly the system she was about to reform. The air in the Eastwood precinct lobby felt as heavy as the gray sky outside. Naomi Keller stood tall at the reception desk, her eyes never leaving Lieutenant Darren Holt. She didn't need to speak much. She was watching, and what unfolded before her only confirmed everything her instincts had warned her about. Holt checked his watch and clicked his tongue in annoyance. How long do you plan to stand there? If you're here to file a complaint or ask about benefits, head downstairs and take a left. Don't waste law enforcement's time. Naomi didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the black man, sitting quietly in the corner. He had been waiting for nearly half an hour. Weariness etched across his face. Have you been waiting long? She asked gently. He hesitated. Been about half an hour, ma'am. They told me to wait for someone to process my report, but no one's even spoken to me. Holt let out a dry laugh. Back again to report your noisy neighbor, huh? Last time you wanted to file a complaint because his dog barked. A few officers chuckled behind him. Naomi looked around the room, her face unmoved, though her blood was starting to boil. You're lieutenant, right? She asked, voice still calm. More than that, Holt replied. lifting his chin. I manage patrol rotations and coordinate field deployment. In short, anyone who walks into this precinct goes through me. And you're proud of that? Naomi asked, her eyes suddenly sharp as blades. Holt paused for a second, then scoffed. Proud, do the job right. We're here to maintain order. Not that everyone understands what that means. His words were like needles, aimed not just at Naomi, but at the weary black man waiting across the room. She knew then these weren't just random remarks. They were symptoms of an invisible structure slowly rotting from within. Another officer entered the lobby, broad-shouldered, close-cropped hair, fingerless gloves like he was headed to a training field. The old chief would be crying if he were still alive, the officer muttered as he passed by Naomi. Why is that? Naomi asked calmly, unmoved. Because there's a black woman standing in the middle of this room acting like she's in charge. He laughed loudly. Another round of laughter erupted. But this time, not everyone joined in. A female clerk typing nearby paused, glancing toward Naomi with a flicker of unease in her eyes. Naomi exhaled quietly, but her gaze blazed. She wasn't just a new face. She was a challenge to an entire system. Footsteps echoed from the corridor behind. A young man stepped out from the office, Assistant Director Human Resources Louis Darnell, sharply dressed with trendy glasses. He glanced around, spotted Naomi, and his expression shifted immediately. Ms. Keller, he blurted out, quickly approaching. Naomi turned, her expression easing slightly, though her voice remained composed. Hello, Mr. Darnell. I'm here right on time, as scheduled. The room fell completely silent. Darnell froze, then turned to Holt. Do you know who she is? Holt's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Naomi calmly reached into her blazer and pulled out her Eastwood police chief's badge. The metallic surface caught the light and gleamed, reflecting straight into the eyes of those who had just mocked her. She turned back to Holt. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a gavel against the cold tile floor. I'm Naomi Keller, the new chief of police for Eastwood. The entire lobby turned to stone at Naomi Keller's clear, cutting words. HR Assistant Director Louis Darnell stood frozen, visibly pale. Lieutenant Darren Holt stared at her as if someone had just smacked the crooked ideology right out of him. You're the new chief? Holt asked, his voice caught, stripped of its usual arrogance. Naomi didn't answer right away. She slowly clipped the police chief badge onto her blazer, then gave a slight nod, her eyes never leaving Holt's. And I've taken note of everything that just happened in the last 10 minutes, she said, not loudly, but with a steely tone that hit the room like hammer strikes. Holt stepped forward, his face flushed red. The rage didn't just come from fear. It came from the shame of being exposed in front of his entire unit. A black woman had just unmasked him in the very fortress he thought was his. You think that makes you something special? He growled, voice trembling. You sneak in here, hide who you are, stir the pot like some kind of disruptor? Naomi didn't flinch. Her expression remained composed. I didn't disrupt anything, Lieutenant Holt. I stood still and let you all show yourselves. Don't think that badge entitles you to anything special around here, Holt nearly hissed, fists clenched tight. Lieutenant Darren, please, calm down, Darnell stammered, panicked. But it was already too late. In a moment, Darren, Holt would later wish he could erase from existence. He raised his hand and struck Naomi, hard. The sound cracked through the room like a whip, silencing every breath, every shuffle of movement. Naomi staggered slightly, but did not fall. She remained standing, one hand touching her cheek, now stinging hot with the imprint of the blow. The room froze in collective shock. A young officer nearby gasped, "What the hell did you just do?" Holt stood still, eyes wide, as if just realizing the weight of what he'd done. Sweat poured down his temple like rain. Naomi turned her head slowly. Her eyes were sharp enough to cut steel, her lips pressed into a thin, unmoving line. She looked Holt square in the eye and spoke in a voice so calm it sent a chill down the room's spine. You just assaulted the chief of police of Eastwood, directly, in front of multiple witnesses. A hushed voice whispered in horror from behind a desk. God, that's assault on a superior in the station. Darnell, pale and trembling, fumbled for his phone, and immediately called human resources. Naomi didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She turned to a female officer standing nearby and said with steady clarity, "Cuff Lieutenant Holt." "Now." "Ma'am, but he just committed a crime. This is an order from the chief. I repeat, cuff him. Immediately." The female officer hesitated for only half a second, then moved toward Holt with her hand on her cuffs. Holt stepped back, stammering, This is a misunderstanding." "No." Naomi cut him off. "It's your true nature finally unmasked." The sound of handcuffs locking around Holt's wrists rang out with metallic finality. Those who once laughed with him now looked away, heads down, unable to meet Naomi's gaze. No one defended him. No one dared. In that moment, the old order of Eastwood began to collapse. Not with gunfire, but with a single slap thrown in the wrong direction. The room stayed frozen in silent panic as Darren Holt stood cuffed. Officers who once slapped his back and shared his arrogance now melted into the shadows, like school children caught cheating on a test. Naomi Keller remained standing in the center, strangely composed, her fingers gently brushing the tender mark on her cheek. She turned toward the hallway. At that moment, the door to HR burst open and a tall, sharp-featured woman in a Navy business suit stepped out in a rush. Charlene Moore, Director of Human Resources. She'd arrived within minutes of Darnell's call. "Dear God, what is happening here?" Charlene gasped, eyes darting around the room until they landed squarely on Lieutenant Holt in handcuffs. Why is Lieutenant Holt? She hadn't yet seen Naomi, still standing calmly in the center of it all. Naomi said nothing at first. She simply held out a gold-plated badge, the inscription clear and unmistakable. Naomi Keller, Chief of Police, Eastwood Department. Charlene stared at it, then slowly looked up, and finally saw Naomi. Her mouth dropped open. "Oh my God! Chief Keller," she blurted out, turning to the stunned crowd. Her voice cracked as she announced, "Everyone, this is our new Chief of Police, Naomi Keller. She was officially appointed this morning. She came for an internal review before the formal introduction this afternoon." A collective, strangled gasp rippled through the room. Not panic, just pure, frozen shock. Whispered murmurs spread like cracks through ice. The officers who had just been laughing and jeering now stared at the floor like it might swallow them whole. Charlene looked at Naomi with visible regret. "Chief, I'm so sorry. I should have met you at the front. What happened?" Naomi responded evenly. A surprise organizational culture assessment. Results, multiple failures. Just then, the intercom dinged with a chime, followed by the voice of Assistant City Manager Gavin Ortiz. "Attention all staff at the Eastwood Police Department. Effective immediately, Ms. Naomi Keller has been officially appointed as the new Chief of Police. She is the first black woman in Eastwood's history to hold this position. Chief Keller will address the department at 3 p.m. today in the main hall. Attendance is mandatory." The moment the announcement ended, every eye in the room turned to Naomi, no longer with curiosity or contempt, but with fear and sudden, sobering respect. Naomi took a deep breath, then calmly stepped to the central desk where the internal phone was waiting. She lifted the receiver. "Assistant Ortiz," she said, "I want to meet with the mayor in the next 30 minutes. We need to discuss immediate reform strategy." "Yes, Chief. I'll make it happen." She hung up the phone and turned to face the officers, still standing frozen. All shift supervisors. Conference room A2. 15 minutes. No absences. Anyone late, consider a voluntary resignation. As she moved to leave the room, Naomi paused beside Holt, now pale and trembling, looking less like a lieutenant and more like a ghost of power past. "I don't need you to be afraid of me, Lieutenant Holt," she said, voice steady. "I just need you to understand, around here, the laws stand above everything." With that, she walked away, leaving the front lobby in complete, echoing silence. And for the first time in years, the Eastwood Police Department was being forced to look itself in the mirror. Naomi Keller was walking toward her new office, the air still pulsed with tension and disbelief. But she didn't let it sway her. She pulled out her phone when she heard hurried footsteps behind her. It was Charlene Moore, director of HR, accompanied by two mid-ranking officers, a man and a woman, both still visibly shaken by what they'd just witnessed. Chief Keller. Charlene spoke up, her voice low but urgent. We need to clarify about Lieutenant Holt. Do you want us to file a temporary suspension report first, or... Naomi slid her phone back into her coat pocket and turned, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. No, I don't need a suspension report. She walked over to where Darren Holt still stood in handcuffs, eyes downcast, sweat beading across his forehead. Naomi stopped in front of him, then addressed the entire department with a voice that rang clear and undeniable. Lieutenant Darren Holt, you are under arrest for assaulting a civilian inside a police facility, a felony offense under Section 243B of the State Penal Code. And even more serious, considering the victim is a commanding officer. The room erupted into murmurs, hushed but urgent, like dry grass catching flame. Is she really going through with it? This has never happened before. Is the mayor going to back her up? Holt, stunned into silence at first, finally found his voice. His words were strained, half-growled through clenched teeth. You're destroying my career over some power trip. I've served the city for 17 years. Naomi didn't flinch. She met his eyes, firm and unwavering. And exactly because you know the law, because you know your position, you have zero excuse for breaking them. Then she turned to her officers. Officer Medina logged the arrest. Transfer him to holding Unit C. Officer Medina, a petite but resolute Latina officer, stepped forward with her partner. They moved to escort Holt, who struggled slightly, face flushed deep red, shouting over his shoulder, "This is a mistake. You'll regret this. I got friends on the city council, the police commission, even the local press." Naomi said nothing. She simply watched as he was led away, hands bound, pride shattered. Only when the metal door of the holding area slammed shut behind him did she turn back to the room of silent, stiff officers. And if anyone here believes that status or personal connections place them above the law, she said, her eyes sweeping over nervous faces, you should resign. Now. Just then, a young man stepped forward from the far end of the hallway, wearing a police intern's uniform. He looked unsure, but his eyes held something clear and honest. Chief Keller, he said, voice quiet but steady. I'm Elgin Summers. Final year intern from Eastwood University. I was at the front desk this morning. I saw everything. Naomi nodded. Thank you for not staying silent. He blushed, fidgeting. I want to say, this is the first time I've ever seen someone actually do the right thing, no matter the cost. Naomi placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Don't ever let fear stop you from being good. Real change doesn't start with a crowd. It starts with one person willing to say, enough. He nodded, eyes brimming with tears. The room was silent, as if everyone was privately reckoning with what had just happened, and with whatever might be coming next. Naomi stepped out, leaving behind a team beginning to question itself, and a police department on the verge of being rewritten from the ground up. News of Lieutenant Darren Holt's arrest inside the Eastwood Police Department spread like wildfire in a dry season. Within hours, the entire department, from records to traffic control, was buzzing with shock. The whispers were no longer confined to corners. They had erupted into half-hushed conversations in hallways, beside coffee machines and inside break rooms. She really cuffed Holt? Right there in front of everyone. They say the whole thing was caught on security cam. Damn, that's the end of him. The very next morning, Naomi Keller convened an emergency meeting in the third-floor strategy room. It was packed. Department heads, team leaders, senior staff, and a representative from the legal division were all present. But the atmosphere was different this time. No laughter, no bravado, just quiet anticipation. Naomi stood at the center of the room in a crisp, regulation police uniform. Her jacket was immaculately pressed, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Chief Ann Keller was printed clearly on the nameplate pinned to her chest. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With just her calm, steely tone and razor-sharp gaze, she made every back in the room straighten. Lieutenant Holt is currently suspended and facing criminal charges. All of his access credentials, data permissions, and departmental equipment have been revoked and secured. A few people in the room inhaled sharply. Naomi swept her eyes across the crowd. This was not an isolated incident. It was a direct result of the system that has enabled bias, misconduct, and silence. I did not come here to preserve that system. She turned to Internal Affairs Director Ramon Ramos, a quiet, middle-aged Latino man, known for being discreet but uncompromising. I'm ordering a comprehensive audit of all disciplinary records, complaints, and whistleblower reports related to racial bias, abuse of authority, or cover-ups going back 10 years. That audit begins this morning. All eyes turned to Ramos. He gave a slow, solemn nod, understanding that this wasn't a suggestion. It was a direct order. By the end of that afternoon, 3 officers seen laughing on the video after Naomi was slapped were placed on temporary suspension pending investigation. 2 others, including Sergeant Alan Briggs, a longtime ally of Holt, were summoned for interviews with independent inspectors from the State Department of Justice. Those who had once walked the halls with unchecked power were beginning to feel the chill of an approaching storm. On social media, the leaked security footage clip went viral overnight, racking up millions of views. Hashtags like hashtag Justice in Eastwood and hashtag Chief Keller top nationwide trending lists. Citizens sent handwritten letters, emails, and even stood outside the police headquarters to leave flowers and notes of encouragement. One elderly woman, over 70 years old, brought a sign that read, "Thank you for not bowing your head." That evening, Naomi sat alone in her office, her desk lamp casting a steady glow over a thick stack of case files, records of buried incidents long swept under the rug. Outside her window, the police station was unusually quiet, but she knew it was a silence before a real quake, and she was ready for it. National media outlets descended on Eastwood like a tidal wave. CNN, MSNBC, CBS News. Everyone wanted an exclusive interview with the slap police chief, the moniker the press had chosen, though Naomi had never wanted to be remembered that way. But the true turning point came on Thursday night. While Naomi was in a closed-door meeting with the city's legal counsel at headquarters, a quiet gathering began at the front gate, dressed in dark blue shirts. They came military veterans, single mothers, college students, and elders who had once marched for civil rights. All of them held hand-painted signs that read, "This is our police station, not a shelter for prejudice." A drumbeat echoed. Then, through an old megaphone, a voice rang out over the square. "We didn't come here to cause trouble. We came to say, we've seen, we've heard, and we will not stay silent any longer." Naomi stood behind a second-story curtain, watching. The crowd grew. They didn't shout. They sang. "A Change Is Gonna Come" by Sam Cooke rose into the night air, raw, haunting, unwavering. Then, something no one expected happened. A group of previously silent officers, those who had once stayed quiet for fear of retaliation, stepped out from the main lobby. Among them were Sergeant Amy Morales and Officer Darnell Price, both of whom had served under Holt. Without a word, they joined the crowd, removed their caps, and folded their hands over their hearts. A local journalist streamed the moment live on Facebook. 30,000 people watched in real time. Inside, Naomi placed a hand over her own heart. This was no longer just an internal investigation. It was a movement, a chance to rebuild from the root. That night, Naomi agreed to appear on Nightline with veteran reporter Carla Reed. "Chief Keller, were you afraid when Holt struck you?" Naomi paused for a few seconds. Then she replied, "Yes, but not because of the slap. I was afraid that if I stayed silent, some other black child would grow up thinking that disrespect and oppression are just part of life." Carla looked at her, visibly moved. And so was the nation. The next morning, Eastwood City Hall received over 1,200 emails from residents demanding a full investigation into racial discrimination within the police department. Several major businesses in Georgia announced plans to withdraw funding from the city unless concrete reforms were enacted. The city council called for an emergency meeting. And Holt? He remained in custody, awaiting trial. No attorney in town was willing to publicly defend him. Naomi knew this was only the beginning. The pressure would grow. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. A system was beginning to shift, not because of anger alone, but because the people had finally chosen to stand together. By noon, sunlight bathed the main square of Eastwood, casting a golden glow on the steps of City Hall, where a podium had been set up. In front of it stood hundreds of local residents, and behind the security barriers, members of the press packed tightly, microphones and cameras aimed squarely at the woman stepping up to speak, Naomi Keller, 46 years old, the first black chief of police in Eastwood's history. Naomi wore her formal uniform for the first time since the incident, for silver stars glinted on her shoulders. Her badge shone from her chest. She stood tall, unflinching, the faint bruise still visible on her left cheek, a quiet, living testament to the story the nation was now watching unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and even through the microphone, "I didn't come to Eastwood to be a placeholder in someone's diversity speech. I came to do the work." She paused, letting the words settle. Her gaze swept across the crowd. What happened inside our police station last week was not an accident. It was a natural outcome of a system that has, for too long, protected privilege, excused bias, and remained silent in the face of wrongdoing. Pens scribbled across reporter notepads. A few scattered claps rippled through the crowd. "I stand here today to announce the Eastwood Police Department will be rebuilt from the ground up. We will end discriminatory practices. We will rebuild trust with our community. And we will no longer tolerate officers who fail to respect human dignity, regardless of race, religion, or background." The applause grew louder, then surged into a sustained ovation. Naomi raised her hand gently for quiet, then continued, "I have ordered the formation of an independent oversight committee composed of community leaders, civil rights advocates, and legal experts. Every complaint will be reviewed transparently. Every violation will be dealt with publicly. This is not a promise. It's a plan of action." A young girl sitting on her father's shoulders held up a sign that read, "You are my hope." Naomi saw it, smiled softly, but in her eyes there was no pride, only resolve. "I know I'll be opposed. I know there are those within this department who are already working against me. But I also know this: I am no longer alone." She closed her speech with a single sentence that hushed the entire square. "We cannot erase the past, but we can reshape the future, starting right here." And this time, the applause didn't stop, because it wasn't just support. It was a beginning. Just 1 week after Naomi Keller's landmark speech in Eastwood's town square, the story of the first black female police chief assaulted by her own subordinate had swept across the country. More than a local incident, it had become a symbol of systemic awakening. National networks launched special segments, reforming the force. From Eastwood to America, the New York Tribune ran a front-page feature titled, "Naomi Keller, the woman who's changed American policing from the place that once shut her out." In dozens of cities, from Richmond to Mobile to Springfield, city councils began holding emergency hearings, ordering audits of police hiring, promotion, and complaint handling procedures. Grassroots advocacy groups, once dismissed or silenced, were now being invited to policy roundtables. Back in Eastwood, Naomi had become more than commander. She was now the face of a movement. Young recruits lined up for new racial bias training programs. Veteran officers who had once remained silent were forced to choose, evolve or be left behind. "I never thought I'd work in a precinct where respect was the baseline, not something you had to fight for," said Officer Caleb Mitchell during a televised community forum. "Chief Keller's story made me believe I'm not just a side character in this reform. I'm part of it." Naomi never sought the spotlight, but through every letter of support, every call from a mayor in another city, she realized what happened wasn't just justice for her. It was the planting of reform's first real seeds inside a system many believed unchangeable. One crisp autumn afternoon, at the statewide police reform conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, Naomi Keller stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause from hundreds of attendees, young officers, lawmakers, and citizens who had once marched for justice. Soft lights glinted off her neatly pressed uniform. But what commanded the room wasn't the shine of her badge. It was a resolve in her eyes and the quiet conviction in her smile. Naomi looked out across the crowd and began, "I don't stand here today as a black woman who was attacked in the very station she was appointed to lead. I stand here because I chose not to step back. I stand here to say just one thing. Change is possible, but it never comes from silence. The room fell still. Her words cut through every doubt, every ingrained prejudice she'd faced from day one in the force. When I was struck by a fellow officer, not because I broke protocol, but because I didn't fit his image of what leadership should look like, I realized what needs to change isn't just policy, it's mindset and courage. She walked the stage slowly, not to perform, but to carry the weight of each truth she had earned. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to face it, even when you know you might stand alone. I was once the only woman of color in a room full of contemptuous stares. I chose not to look away, and because of that choice, the system began to shift. Naomi paused. Her eyes held a fire that no backlash could extinguish. If you ask me today what's changed, I'll tell you, I have. And because I changed, I helped the system begin to change. She smiled, bowed her head slightly, and stepped back to the sound of a standing ovation that wouldn't end. And in the eyes of everyone who watched, reporters, officers, citizens, they didn't just see a police chief. They saw a light, a reckoning, a reminder that injustice only survives when we agree to look away.